Okay, so this section is about how I look at depression and suicidal feelings. Um, I put it out in the TEDx talk that for me, that the first time I seriously contemplated suicide was at the age of 5. I was on the seventh balcony, um, and I've already been through a lot. Our dad has taken us away from my mom who's in Brazil and then brought us to Lebanon, and then he went to England to create a new life, and then she came to Lebanon and took him to the criminal court. So then they smuggled us to Syria to hide us from all of that, and they put me in my brother's class, and he was 2 years older than me. And at the time, I didn't even speak the language because our first language was Portuguese. And anyway, look, basically, the point is I'm just giving you a taste of the circumstances themselves were very difficult. So, for me personally, when I look at depression, it was always clear. So, okay, so that incident at the age of 5, contemplated suicide. I went to my grandmother and asked her what happens when we die and just everything goes black. And so I literally went and experimented with it. I sat on the bed, lied on the bed, closed my eyes, and after 10 minutes, it was like, realized that it's all dark. I'm in outer space and I'm still here. And I started to cry because I literally did not want to exist, because I literally felt myself, I'm still here. So, I mean, it, it, it's funny, like I'm looking back now at the age of 5, I literally took a logical, practical approach to it. I mean, it's not it's even had a method. It's like I wanted to not exist, and she's when she said everything goes black, I experimented with that, um, and I once I experiment with it, I realize I'm still here. There's no way for me to not be here. I don't remember exactly, but what happened and how I processed all of this, I just remember snippets of it. But the point is, somehow I took it out of my head after that, and things got better, on a practical level. And I don't remember from there on being suicidal. But at the age of 13, having stabilized and having learned a new language and doing not so bad in school, um, I had what I'll describe later on in a different video, what I describe as a spiritual experience that was not invited. I was, from one day to another, I was praying, but at the same time, I didn't know what I was saying because my language was very good. But I had a very difficult to put into words experience. I literally felt my chest open up, and I felt this love for the whole world. And it was like the sense of me, Sami, being an I, disintegrated. I literally felt I'm one with everything. And I wasn't reading any books on any of that kind of stuff. And so I had that. I had this compassion just happen. Um, and I also had more focused concentration. I have no idea where that came from. Um, and that lasted for about 2 months. And on some intellectual level, didn't even make sense, because at one time I was looking at newspaper and there was this picture of somebody who was a serial killer, and I felt compassion for them. And the intellect was like, dude, that makes no sense. You're feeling compassion for somebody who's a killer. So there was a lot of stuff that was happening that I don't know how it happened. No idea. It's not like I was hanging out. I mean, I spent a lot of time later on reading about spiritual experiences, and it's not unique, and there's a lot of spiritual approaches, whether it's Buddhism, shamanism, whether it's the spiritual aspects of various religion, like in Sufism, they call that experience the opening of the heart. Now in Christianity and Judaism, I know there are spiritual experiences that might be considered on the fringe of regular religion. But anyway, look, for the sake of this, the trigger for depression was this experience. Because this lasted for about 2 months, and then that's it. Like my nervous system short-circuited. And then I fell into a depression. I had a light form of hepatitis that took 3 weeks to get out of it. I forgot which one it is. And then that's it. And I plummeted. I lost concentration. So I've had this like 2 months of super concentration, a lot of compassion, and a disintegration of a sense of self. And it lasted 2 months. And then it was a slow descent into darkness. I didn't go back to the initial state of that level of concentration I was used to. No, I slowly started to lose concentration. I remember I started to play guitar around that time when I was having that experience, spiritual experience. And I remember the teacher saying, wow, you're really improving very fast. You know, so for 2 months I improved really fast, and then that was it. I lost concentration. So how do I describe depression is, for me personally, it was loss of concentration, and I just kept on getting worse. And I couldn't focus on my studies in school. The only way I could focus was the last minute. So it was like an adrenaline rush because of fear. But the thing that hurt most is, you know, I could understand not having the energy to study for school because that's like somebody else's agenda, you know. But music, what I really loved, and not being able to, you know, to focus, that really hurt, and that showed me that I had a problem. There is the emotional pain, heaviness. I would lie in bed looking at the ceiling and feel like I was just dead weight. My body felt heavy to me. Now, it wasn't like that 24 hours a day. You know, I still had music. I would still have moments of connection, but there was some sort of disintegration and a heaviness, you know. Now, you know, every summer I would go visit my dad in London. It was a very lonely time, but there was no help with any of this at the time. I was growing up in the Civil War, and it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense that you would feel that way, except not everybody felt that way. By the time I sought help, much later on, I don't know. I mean, at the age of 19, you know, I went, by then I'd moved to Ireland and enrolled in psychology, and I was getting, you know, everything just kept on getting heavier. I was feeling suicidal eventually, and there was one occasion where I cut myself intentionally because I felt numb. I'll talk about that in a different video. But my friend discovered the blood on my vest and mentioned it to my dad. Anyway, look, I ended up going to the psychiatrist of the Trinity College, and when I explained to her my history, she was like, well, look, it makes sense. My suggestion to you is to take the year off. She gave me some placebos, which I kind of knew there was placebo. But for me, it was very clear that the way I was feeling was coming from my history, you know, because there's a lot of talk about depression. You know, there are so many, you know, you've got the medical model, you've got therapy. For me, what's clear is that if you have that many traumas in your life, it's natural to feel this way. So as opposed to somebody who never had any traumas, or actually, this is tricky because you could have traumas and not see them as traumas, or you can have traumas and repress them, and then they come out, or they don't come out, or you act them out, like with alcohol or sex addiction or different types of addiction. I'll leave that for now. But the most important thing is that I don't view depression as a pathology. There is nothing wrong with me. I see depression as an overwhelmed system, a person who's just hurting, and it's a system shutdown. So to make an analogy, if you have pain in your bones, well, do you have a disease? I don't know. It depends what happened. If you just been hit by a car, I wouldn't be looking at disease first. So this is how I look at depression. I don't actually think of it as depression anymore. I think of it as trauma, different traumas. And different traumas is like, yeah, well, I got hit on this leg, it got a broken bone, and I've got hit on this leg and there's another broken bone, and there's other broken bones here and here. These are what the traumas are hitting different parts of my system. If I try to put weights, if I'm trying to relieve the weight on one bone and move to another one, that's gonna hurt. So the whole system is messed up. So in that sense, I am designed as an animal with a nervous system and an emotional world that if I have had all of these losses, then I'm gonna hurt. So I don't see depression as something wrong. It's not a pathology. It's a situation, it's a system that has been either malnourished or poisoned or hit, whatever you want to look at it, and it needs attention. It needs loving attention. And that includes suicidal feelings. All of these years that I felt suicidal impulses, at no point was I feeling like I need to hurt myself. I wasn't trying to kill myself. I was actually trying to leave pain. And that's a very different way of looking at it. I wasn't trying to damage something that I hated. I was struggling with my inner world. I was sometimes impatient that I cannot focus. And when I worked on myself, I was impatient that this work is not fast enough. But the pain wasn't coming from self-loathing. I can get into that some other time. It's not like I didn't struggle with who I was, but the suicidal impulses, the way I look at it, is simply a person who's trying to relieve themselves of pain. All I'm saying is like, I live in this body, it hurts. I live in this life, being in this body, in this life hurts. I wanted the pain to stop. It was literally as simple as that. So personally, I don't see it as a pathology. And luckily, I didn't have problems with impulse control, meaning that when the tipping point for me was the age of 19, when I felt, okay, this is too much for me to be alive. It really hurts. I want to leave. And what made me stay is thinking about my two cousins and their mom. And it's like realizing they're going to hurt. So I cut a deal with myself. I'm going to work as much as I can on myself to stay here so that they don't get hurt. And if I don't succeed, then I'll apologize and leave. But here I'm prioritizing them over myself, because for me it was very clear it's going to take a long time to work through all of this stuff, and I had no guarantees that I could or that life was going to get easier. So at a certain point, and I'll get into this in some other video, at a certain point of this much later, a part of me was like, dude, you prioritize others over us. We wanted to have a less painful life. So there are complexities to all of this. But the point is that I am still, to this day, more and so ever, I don't see, when there is so much trauma, I don't see depression as a pathology, or suicide feelings as something that is wrong. It's natural for a mammal with the nervous system wiring that if they're hurt over a long period of time, that they're going to not want to be in pain. We are wired that when under threat, if there's a tiger coming at us, we're wired to want to leave. We're wired to literally run. And depression is when you have pain on the inside and you want to run. So one of the things that I was talking to a person about, social media and when I do this work, how do I spread it and all of that? And he was like, he saw the TEDx talk and he was like, but everybody has suicidal feelings at a certain point. So then I was trying to figure out, how do I explain to them the difference between mild depression or depression that comes from circumstances. Say your partner leaves you and you're heartbroken. And how do you differentiate? How do I look at it? How do I differentiate this from depression that comes from trauma? And another thing somebody asked, like, how do I know I have depression? As if it's a disease. Now, it can be a biological imbalance, and even trauma over time can create biological imbalances. In my case, it's very clear, and this is how I look at it. And it's important because actually, hopefully the explanation will reveal why it's important. So I have this analogy that, let's say there's an athlete and they're not performing very well. So they go to an expert, and the expert looks at various aspects of their lives, like their technique, for example, in whatever sport they have, and they study it. And they can give advice very specific. You know what? When you do this, you're actually affecting that. Okay, so you can have a problem-solving approach to the technique. You can also look at what else is weakening them, like the relationship. What kind of relationship are they into? Because now we know that if you're in a relationship that is very stressful, it's going to affect your whole system. It's going to affect your motivation. It's going to affect how you look at yourself. So you can look at that. And you can look at their diet as well. What kind of diet are you on? Do you have any specific intolerances? So you can take a situation like that, study it, take a problem-solving approach to it, and then recommend an approach that you can implement. And in some ways, it's all about what kind of effort you should make in different areas. So, and one way of looking at it is that you can try harder or try more efficiently. But ultimately, that's an intellectual assessment based on what you see and what you discuss and what you explore. The method is linear with a problem-solving intention that the person can take these things and implement them on themselves, and hopefully it'll improve. That's one. Now, if they discover that this athlete has a torn ligament, then you take a completely different approach. Then the approach is, you need to rest it, dude. You don't try harder. So the difficulty with trauma is that often you don't know what's going on internally. sometimes for me it feels like a collapsed system, and one metaphor that I have for myself, I don't know if it works for others, but it doesn't matter that it works for others. I guess the point is that you can use metaphor to look at a situation in through a different tool. It's like through different eyes, So the metaphor for me is that I've had a lot of disruptions in my early childhood with mom and dad. Didn't grow up with either of them. Grew up with my grandmother and my brother. These two have their complications. And then the Civil War, you have that. Loss of a very close friend, Later on, I have a lot of difficulties as well. I lost what I was saying. I forgot what I was saying. What was I saying?
What you wanted to say next?
I don't know what I was. What was I talking about?
You were talking about the difference between like you are giving this example of
the metaphor. Sorry.
athlete ligament. About.
No. I actually moved on to the. I was thinking of something else completely now. Okay, thanks. Okay, so I started thinking of a different metaphor, and I got lost. I'll probably keep this section in the video just to show you that. One thing my therapist says is that I have all files open at the same time. So some people think linearly, and I'm kind of taken from different direction. Okay, I'll go back to what I was trying to say. So I've had all of these various different traumas or disruptions to the developments, because in child development, adolescent development, adult development, there are stages, like you crawl first, you don't suddenly walk or run, so there are stages of development which are important. And if these get disrupted, then will affect your development and how different systems internally start affecting each other, like from how emotions and thinking and even body issues. But the point is this. One metaphor I use for myself, and I use various metaphors, by the way. Nothing is fixed. One of the metaphors I use is that I live in this body. I see it as a building. The structure of the building, when you put them in, are not very solid. This is early childhood disruptions. There are various aspects to the building itself, like ventilation, for example. Sometimes I relate, the metaphor is to breathing. The electrical wiring of the house, that's the nervous system. There is the layout, the internal layout of it, and the use of space. Most of the time for me, my space is chaotic. And that's because my guess is that it's reflecting an emotional state. There is where the building sits, for how do I feel while I'm in Lebanon versus how do I feel while I'm in Ireland. Lebanon triggers memories of the Civil War. Barcelona, no, So I look at the inner work as somebody who lives in a building and is trying to do construction work on the building while they live in it. That's why this work takes so long, because you've got electrical wiring which wasn't wired. It's like as the building was being constructed, you have this electrical wiring coming up, except you had a little bit of an earthquake there. So there was some problems with the structure, and now the water system sometimes leaks into this electrical wirings, and you have a total system shut down. So it's very difficult to explain any of this to friends who had a relatively stable upbringing. and they try to give me a problem-solving approach. Why don't you just do this? Even my brother, which we have very similar upbringing, but we really diverted and we are very different by character. Sometimes he comes up with suggestions that, work for him, but they don't work for me at all. I'm not generally a nature guy. I get overwhelmed when I'm in new situations. The point is that it's very difficult to describe any of this to people who haven't had so many disruptions and traumas, or have had disruptions and traumas that can look very similar, like my brother. We share the same early history for sure, but we react extremely differently to them. So it's a continual process of discovery and trying different things, and there's tons of books that are out there with their own language that can be very alienating, for me at least, because they're trying to a lot of the times they're trying to describe something from an intellectual place as a clinician for other clinicians while generalizing. I read some of the stuff and sometimes like, what, dude, do you have to learn, use that kind of very technical language? Give me something that is guttural. Metaphor works for me, except all of this exists, mental health professions exist within a medium that for them is science, and they have very specific ethics. The best of science has certain ethics and certain methodology that they're trying to stick by. And I'm not knocking it. This is necessary. My point is that field has very specific way of working and developing. Mental health fields, whether it's social services, whether it's psychiatry, whether it's psychology, and the interaction between these. And you also have the pharmaceutical companies getting into there. You have issues to do with politics. You have issues to do with, you're suggesting an approach. How do we know it works? So that's a pressure that is, I'm not knocking it. It makes sense. If you are part of the government and you need to fund something, or even if you're a private client, tell me how does, prove to me that your methodology works. Otherwise, why not try something else? Or why should I fund this? And these are valid questions for that institution. But all of these issues, which are very general, create their own problems, and some of these problems are not my problem. For me, I've tried a lot of different approaches that I won't necessarily be able to recommend them to other clients, because some of these approaches are messy, but sometimes they worked for me. So my point in all of this is that it's not clear cut. Complex trauma is very difficult to describe, and when it comes to individual differences within a field that is trying to generalize, which makes sense. But for me, what I'm trying to do here with you is share the complexities of what does individual work looks like. And at this stage, having done both, having trained as a psychologist and practiced in the field and still connected to the literature that is out there, and struggling with my own stuff, it's a world apart. It's very tricky. And it's easy to fall into, and look, my main goal is to share what the process looks like. And ultimately, it's a messy process. I could easily package all of this as a psychologist and generalize and make it look like I've got my shit together. This is a very clear path. But that's not how it was for me. And I'm trying to share with you what I didn't get. which is the messiness of it, because that's what the daily work looks like. It's messy. We stop.